Hello folks, and welcome to another episode of The Right Stuff, sponsored by the Writer's Bloc of the Eastern Shore in cooperation with PAC 14. With me today is my co-host, Dr. Gianni Hayes, author of 18 books and renowned speaker worldwide and radio show personality. Today, Gianni and I are going to be talking about some writing stuff that you as a beginning writer need to know about. Gianni, tell them a little bit about what we're going to talk about today.
One of the things that we need to take a look at is everybody wants to be a writer, Andy. You know that. No matter where we go, we hear people say, oh, I want to write my life story. Or they'll say something like, you're a writer. I have a great book. I'm going to do that. I'm going to write it, and it's going to be a bestseller. Well, that's not quite true. First of all, that's not how it happens. And secondly, because you think you want to write doesn't necessarily make you a writer. So we're going to look at some of the traits that are most common to successful writers. I'm going to throw the first one out, and then you tell me one that you think is a necessity for people to be good writers.
Okay.
I think the gift of perseverance is important because people get lots of rejections, and they need to have it in them that they are compelled to do this no matter what the odds, and persevere at doing it.
I couldn't agree more, Gianni. I was reading Stephen King's book on writing, and he had so many rejections, he would put them on a nail in one of the rafters where he wrote, and they would just pile up and pile up and pile up on this rafter. I mean, Stephen King, everybody knows how great an author Stephen King is, but yet he was rejected numerous times before he managed to make some magazine sales. So even if you're a great writer and have a great idea, it's still going to take a while to break through that first barrier into publication. So you've got to have a strong stomach, nerves of steel, and you've got to have that kind of personality that you can take a hit. Don't you agree?
That's key. If you take every rejection personally, you're never going to get anywhere. When I first started out, my fear was I wasn't going to be a good enough writer, and it would never get published. I had enough rejections to wallpaper my entire house. And I've often thought about laminating all my coffee tables with my rejections. But what you have to do in order to get accepted is you have to know the markets. Don't just send your work off haphazard and say, well, why didn't they publish it? So knowing your markets through organizations like the Writer's Bloc, through the trade publications, I think is valuable.
Exactly. That's one of the best pieces of advice that I could give is know your market. If you're going to write for Chesapeake Bay magazine, subscribe. Find out what kind of stories are in there. If you're going to write science fiction, find out what the current science fiction writers are turning out. The real trick that one editor once said was not only to be able to spot the trend, but to be able to anticipate the trend and know what the next big thing is. That's the big trick.
I would agree with that. I wrote a screenplay for one of my books about cloning men to be military soldiers, but also putting in them a chip in their brains so they could be controlled. I wrote this book probably 6 or 7 years ago, and now all the papers read, not only do we clone, but we have this national ID chip coming, or chips in this, chips in that, chips in clothes. So you have to have pretty much a fortune-telling globe here so you can look at it and see what's going on. But what are some of the other traits you think are important?
Well, besides perseverance, you have to be able to express the idea of your story and why your story would make a great book in a brief amount of time. Editors and publishers are busy. They're interested in one thing, the bottom line. Will your work make money for them? They don't care about making money for you. They're worried about making money for them. So you've got about 20 seconds of their time when they open up that envelope or that email and read that. You've got to be able to, within one page, make your story sound so thrilling that they'll want to read it. That's a trick, and it's tough to do. It takes a lot of practice. But if you can do that successfully, you've got your first step on opening up a publisher or an editor's eyes to how good your story really is.
And I would dare say that not only is it a trick, it's a skill. You have to really manipulate that skill so that when they do open that first page, they are actually grabbed by the very first sentence. And then they say, oh, I better read the next sentence. Then before you know it, they've read several pages, and they're at this point determining whether or not they want to see the rest of the manuscript. So definitely catching their attention and using all the skills. And I do want to touch on that because it's so important. Indy, you would never wake up tomorrow morning and say you want to be a heart surgeon, would you?
Well, no.
No, but you wouldn't even think about trying it on somebody because you have no practice, no training, no skill in that area.
Well, not anybody I liked anyway.
Okay. Well, my point then is, how is it people say, I'm going to write a bestseller, but they've never had a writing class, they haven't mastered grammar, they haven't attended a workshop, they haven't really learned the business.
That's true. First-time best-selling authors are the exception, not the rule. Best-selling authors, as a general rule, came up through the ranks from magazine articles to magazine short stories to look at the great writers of the detective writers of the 30s, Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler. They started out in pulp magazines that paid 2-3 cents a word, churning out detective fiction in the pulps, but all the while they were using that to hone their skills in order to write the big bestsellers like The Big Sleep, Maltese Falcon, and books like that that everybody remembers. Nobody's going to ever remember their pulp magazine days, but everybody remembers the Maltese Falcon.
And again, it's much like a celebrity, a singer who takes years and years to really learn the range of their voice and to put it into effect. It's same thing for writers. They take years to develop their skill, to learn from not only other writers, but to learn from their own writing. And what you wrote when you were 20 years old and what you're writing now, they're two different things because it's a different person writing it now.
Oh, I agree totally. Stuff that I wrote in high school and my early 20s, I look back and read that and I said, this is horrible.
Absolutely.
But it's a lot different than what I'm writing today. It's like I tell my daughter, practice makes perfect. If you want to do something and
Right.
do it well, you have to do it over and over and over until it's done right.
All right, so we have perseverance. Mm-hmm. We said that they need to have grammatical skill.
Right.
They need to learn the business
Right.
and how it works.
Right.
I would also think that they need to have curiosity.
Well, sure. I mean, I don't care what you're writing about, whether you're writing a memoir, whether you're writing about a historical event or a scandal, or if you're writing fiction, you have to take an interest in what you're writing about for it to sound genuine. Stephen King once said, write about what you know. I mean, if you are, for example, a housewife whose husband was a farmer or something like that, you're not going to be writing about space travel. You're going to be writing about your experiences growing up on a farm with a husband who was a farmer and the trials and tribulations of being a housewife, but not going to the moon.
Yeah, but on the other hand, we can look at it this way as well. In one of the anthologies I had written for, I had written about a young boy who went out in the water with his father, who was a waterman. And I'm a city girl. I've never been out in the water. But what I did do was I researched it. I talked to watermen. I went to the water. I saw the kind of vessels they used. I studied the lifestyle of people who live in secluded areas and work the water. And the story did very well. But yes, you should write what you know about, but don't be afraid to step into some other area if you're willing to do all the work that comes with it. That's interviewing, reading, researching, the whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards. I agree totally. If you are, and this is especially true for fiction more than nonfiction, if you're going to write about something fictional, you have to at least have a solid foundation in the nonfiction aspects of it to launch from. And I think that's why people like Michael Crichton have been successful. Michael Crichton started out as a surgeon. His early books were about medical things. But as he grew in his knowledge base, he was able to branch out and talk about space travel, cloning dinosaurs, and his last book about transgenetic creatures. So while he wasn't involved in any of those things directly, he had a solid knowledge base from which to jump from in order to write competently about other things.
And this was true with Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote Helter Skelter, and that whole book was about the Charles Manson case that he prosecuted and won. He turns around, writes his first book. It's a bestseller.
He knew what he was talking about,
That's
and he was able to convey it in a gripping way.
You're right. The verbiage is important. How you express your words, how you twist a phrase. You don't ever want to write predictably, and you don't ever want to write boring.
Exactly.
Thou shalt not bore.
Bore.
That's the key thing. What about ambition?
Well, yeah, you have to want to succeed. You have to have that inside you that makes you want to write well, and want to have that audience to read what you have been writing, because you know your ideas are important. You know your ideas are exciting, but you have to have that ambition to get people to want to read your book. So that's where the business part of it comes in.
And the ambition part also includes the legwork that you must do after your book comes out. If you're fortunate enough to get it published, or if you self-published it or used a Ph.D., and we could talk about that again as well, but whatever venue they use to get their book published, they're not done. They now have the hard work to do, and that's the ambition to get your book into stores, to go to places that will let you set up a booth and sell it, to go through organizations.
Exactly. Well, exactly. I've always said writing the book is the easy part compared to the selling part. And, you know, there are folks out here that are going to be listening to us and say, well, I was going to write my memoirs, or I was going to write about this or that, but I thought about what happens after I've turned it in. Well, you've got to be a super salesman at times. You've got to be able to sell your book by selling yourself. If you've got the kind of personality that you're not comfortable with talking to people about your books or about yourself, you're going to have problems. You know, because when you're selling that book, you are selling who you are and what you have to say. If you can't go to a publisher or a distributor or a bookstore or newspaper or TV and be able to talk competently and engagingly about your book is going to go nowhere. It's going to end up on the remainder list, or with the cover ripped off in a bin somewhere.
And speaking of that, along with the curiosity, in young people, I generally can tell if they're going to be artists or engineers, if they're going to be in the pure thinking rational fields, or if they're going to be in the more expansive artistic fields. And I think part of this was what my parents caught when I was very young, always asking, why? Why? I'd hear something, I want to know why that happened. I want to know how it happened. And that was true for me throughout my entire life, is if you're going to relate something to me, I want to know not only how, why, when, and where, I want to know how the person felt. So it's very important that if you are truly a writer, and in my opinion, if you're really a writer, you are cursed. Because you can't live with doing anything else. I've tried, Andy, I've tried different jobs that, get me out of this situation where you're writing morning to night, because writing is not, I'm going to do it an hour today and then I'm going to play. No, writing is with you all the time. Your art is with you all the time. You're thinking, you're creating, you're jotting down notes. It's with you all the time. And I did try to get out of that, and I can't. Because when I'm not writing, I can't even live with myself, let alone my husband live with me.
Well, I can understand that. The creative urge has always been with me too, to express myself in some way creatively, first through art and now through writing. But I learned early on that it's, there's something inside a person that makes them want to express themselves. You refer to it as your curse, but I can sympathize with you. When I was in college doing summer jobs, working in chicken houses, collecting eggs, I was working out plots and dialogues in my head while I was getting the eggs from the chickens. So there it is. Every job I've always had, I'm always thinking about what I could turn into a story. What would make a good story? What would sell? What would look good on a page? So it's true. It's something that has to consume you, that you have to feel passionate about and able to do it
Obsessed.
well.
You almost
Yeah.
have to be obsessed about it.
Yes, I'd say so. And especially if it's something that you want to make a big bestseller. If you're shooting for the moon, you want a national bestseller, you have got to think of nothing else but honing that book, sharpening that to the finest literary point you can put on it.
A lot of people attempt to write fiction in particular, but this is true for nonfiction because people are nonfiction as well. You cannot sit down and write a book unless you have used your skills of observation all the time. You have to listen to how people talk. You have to catch the nuances in their dialect, in their speech. You have to watch how they work together or apart, even something as simple as how they walk, use their hands. There's a show on that's called Wife Swap.
Oh, yes.
I like that show. You know why I like that show?
No.
It's really simple, but I like the show simply because you see people in different environments. Everybody has their way of thinking, this is how things are done. And then suddenly they're thrown into another environment, and generally it's a complete extreme of what they're used to. Then you watch the dynamics. You see, and that's what writers do. They watch the dynamics of interactions of various people, and they carry that interaction, those same dynamics, into the story, because no fiction is going to be good unless it seems realistic, even though it's not.
Exactly. The reader has to care about the characters in fiction. The reader has to suspend his disbelief in fiction, especially science fiction, fantasy. So you have to be able to make the reader comfortable in caring about what's going on in your book. And the characters are what does that. The characters and the dialogue, the plot. Well, as you know, there are only, 7 basic plots in existence. So no matter what plot you think of, it's been done. It's how you present the characters and the situations and the dialogue. Now, last episode, you talked with Ann Foley about capturing Wile Gator Abbott, waterman, famous for his muskrat skiing skills, and how she captured his way of speaking, his mannerisms, so that people reading the book felt like they were listening to him directly. It's just, that's one of the important things, being able to make that person alive. If he's a waterman, I've dealt with people from Smith Island and Tangier Island, and they've got unique ways of talking, expressing themselves. And if you don't capture that right, you'll have somebody from Smith Island or Tangier Island say, well, that's not how we talk, and you've lost part of your audience. You've got to engage the reader, hook him, make him stay for the entire ride. I don't care if you write fiction or nonfiction. You've got to have that hook in there, and you've got to keep your dialogue and writing fresh. People have trouble struggling with the classics because of the way they're written. That's why the Bible has so many translations. People get stuck in the King James Version. They need new versions in today's English. So you've got to be able to engage your reader.
Engage your reader and keep them with you the whole time. The second they find an excuse to get away, they're not going to come back to the story. When I first learned to write, one of the things that was taught to me, and it was one of the most valuable things I've ever learned, when a person opens the first page of your book, they have made an agreement with you. That agreement is, I'm going to take this journey. When I'm on this journey, though, you're going to keep me entertained. You're going to make me want to go to the next part of the journey. Well, if you fail to do that in your writing, if you fail to move them on, if you fail to hold their interest, then you pretty much failed as a writer. Because what good is a book if it's not going to be read?
Exactly.
You know, to call yourself a writer, writer means that not only do you write, but when you're a published writer, it means you're supposed to be read as well. That's why there's the writer and there's the author. So it's important then to hold their interest. It's important to use the kind of language that is going to make them want to continue to read and read. Some of my college students have said to me in the past, I'm writing fiction. Why do I have to go look up this country? I says, because you have this story taking place in this country. And do you know what kind of trees grow there? Do you know what type of weather do they have? See, they don't understand that. Fiction means reality.
Oh, yes. And it has to be told credibly, or it jangles on you. For example, I was reading, many years ago, I read Stephen King's The Dead Zone. Everybody who's read Stephen King's probably read The Dead Zone. Well, it's about a character who can get psychic impressions from people by touching them. And he touched this lady from Poland, and she had a memory of the Nazis going through Poland in 1939. And he described the German helmets, and he described them having tiger tanks. And for me, as a military historian, that was put on the brakes right there, because the tiger tank wasn't introduced until 3 years after Poland was invaded. So I was like, no, there were no tiger tanks then. So that's the kind of thing you're talking about. You have to be able to have the basic facts down. I don't care what you're writing about, whether you're fact, fiction, or whatever. You've got to know what you're talking about, or you're going to get hammered. Recent example, I had an article a few years back about Mexico, and I mistakenly put Incan pyramids instead of Aztec pyramids. And I got people that said, the Incans were in Peru. I'm like, yes, I know that, but, my brain was asleep when I wrote that.
Well, they're also in Mesoamerica.
Well, yeah.
So they were down there,
It was specifically about Mexico.
Yeah.
And, so it's just something you got to watch out for. Check, check, check again. Because the proofers that read the manuscript, they didn't know the difference apparently either. So.
And even if they did, they're not the one going to get blamed for it. It's the author who gets blamed.
Yeah, I took the hit for it.
And this is true if you have an editor and your editor doesn't catch it and it still gets published, it's the author's fault. And when you do write, you have to make sure, especially if you're doing nonfiction, your facts are accurate. And just a couple comments on that. You and I have done a pictorial history together. And, some people commented about the facts. What they don't realize, yes, this is nonfiction, but it's nonfiction of the past. There was nobody alive today who could actually tell us what happened in 1800.
Right.
So we had to rely on the research we did. We had to rely on the people we talked to. And the least reliable thing in the world is a person's memory. That's the least reliable.
I agree.
So when you write a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you have to get the facts as best as you can. I had an article appear in a well-published magazine, and it was about a young girl who was in a halfway house, and part of it was about her father had abused her. And the picture was maybe 8 or 9 people in there, several men, and she was in the middle with her birthday hat on. And so that's what the picture was about, was her, in the middle. She's here, and people all around her, and like I said, some men in the back, and it was she there blowing out her birthday candles. Do you know that my publisher and I got sued because the man in the picture, which you couldn't even see his face, claimed it was her father. And I said to my publisher, that was not her father. He says, I know that. He says, but we're going to pay the settlement anyways because it's not worth our time to argue about it. I was irate because it was not done improperly. But the point is, you have to make sure everything is crossed. All the T's, the I's are dotted. And God only knows if you put it on the internet, you better know what you're doing.
Oh boy, you're right. You're absolutely right. And so after you've done all that, still something may slip through. But that's just some of the pitfalls of writing and research. You have to be, you talked about having a thick skin about taking rejection. You've also got to have a pretty thick skin when it comes to criticism, because once the book is out there, you can't take it back. It's like Pilate said, what I have written, I have written. So whatever you said, you're going to have to own up to it. And just, if there's a mistake, you're just going to say, well, I'm sorry, it was a mistake. I did the best I could. So so we've covered all the basics.
Well, I think one other one, and then we'll already be at the end of the show. That's how quickly it went. But
time flies, you're having fun.
I think we should talk a little bit how important it is to network in the business.
Oh, sure.
And, of course, I formed the Bloc predominantly for that reason in critiquing. But why don't you comment briefly on networking and making contacts with other people, how important that is to become a writer?
Sure, that's extremely important. As I talked about in our first show, it was through the Writer's Block that I was able to meet my publisher, Cambridge Books, and get published. So networking through local writing groups is extremely important. We have a group that includes publishers and includes published authors, and we're able to, help each other out that way. So joining a local writers group, excellent idea. Going to workshops, another great idea. This weekend is the Beach to Bay Writers Conference, and that another writing group sponsors, and it's a great opportunity to meet agents, editors, and publishers. So I would recommend that people are able to hook up with some of the local regional events like that. There's other ones besides Beach to Bay. They have one in Chincoteague, and I think there's another one over on the Bayside sometime. But the point is, look around, see what's going on in your area. Writing workshops are held at local libraries when local authors will hold them. Local bookstores will have meet and greets. There'll be the Delaware Book Fair that happens every fall up in Dover. Wonderful opportunity to meet authors and booksellers and learn things. So, I encourage anybody to look around and see what's available. If you've got an author that you liked, email them. You'd be surprised, they'll email you back. I got a book as a promotion from a publisher. The publisher sent me this book to review, as a review copy. I read it, I liked it so much. I asked her if I could get the author's email to correspond, and she gave it to me, and he and I talked, had a great experience. He's going to write an article for my magazine.
Well, I think that's great. So certainly, if you look at all these different elements we discussed today, I think it gives a very good picture of what actually comprises an author and what motivates them, and whether or not people who think they are writers should be writers. But you have been watching The Right Stuff with Andy Nunez and myself, Dr. Gianni Hayes, and we thank PAC 14 for allowing us to have this show. And Andy, they've been on for 10 years, so this is their 10th year anniversary.
Well, it's fantastic. I think they provide a valuable service, and I wish them 10 more happy years of broadcasting at least, if not 100.
And from the both of us, we say thank you, and tune in again next time.
Would you like to see your community organization or nonprofit group featured on PAC 14? To get started, contact us at 410-677-5014 or visit our website at www.14.org. PAC 14 is a great way to connect with your community.